This morning we're going to talk about the nervous system, and I'm excited because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. We're going to start with a card pull from the Hack Your Nervous System deck, and I am specifically choosing from the mild stress category because sometimes they get a little bit complicated. But the idea is to do the activity that gets pulled on the card. So for those of you that will be watching this in the future, feel free to do that or do it now. See what we get. Good morning. Oh, this is a feet up the wall. So the activity is to lay down on your back next to a wall, an unobstructed wall. And then you scoot up close to the wall and stretch your legs upwards, up the wall. Place your hand on your belly and the other one on your chest and breathe for about 2 to 10 minutes. So this actually helps with circulation, blood pressure, activates the vagus nerve to sit there in that position and breathe. So maybe when we're done, do legs up the wall to relax yourself, relax your body. Okay, so we're going to talk about context, choice, and connection. And the reason I wanted to do this is because in our last session of January, I think it was, some of the girls had asked about doing some classes on being a trauma-informed provider. And I actually have a website that shares more information about what trauma-informed actually means. I'm going to put it in the chat, but I'll also put it in the Notion document. This is from the Missouri Department of Health and a Department of Mental Health, and they actually put together like a little chart that says like different types of trauma aware providers. So it starts with like being aware and then being sensitive and then eventually becoming trauma informed, and what that actually looks like in a practice. Like what things are you doing or is your business doing to support that level of trauma care? And although like this may be targeted towards mental health practitioners, they do say in here, like this is meant to be applied to a wide range of settings. And so we can kind of modify what that means for us. But I think it's a really good overview and allows you to look at like, what does this actually mean when people say that they're trauma informed? And can I actually say that based on what I know and what I'm doing in my practice? So that's a good place to start. And I think that when I was trying to figure out how to bring this into this type of meeting setting, what I thought would be the best is to start to take these little pieces and just explore them one by one. So what does it mean to really understand what trauma is, or, how do you modify your practice so that you are being aware that people experience trauma? So that's what we're starting with, this little piece of context, choice, and connection. So at some different points in here, I'll ask you guys some questions, not for you to respond to me to, but to write down maybe, or look at or brainstorm what ways can you change what you're doing, or are you doing these things already? What kind of modifications can we make within the parameters of context, choice, and connection in your business? This is super important, actually. Just personal note, I got off a meeting with my kids' teachers, and a lot of what they were describing as his like behavior in class, I was like, well, he doesn't feel safe, right? So I'm thinking like he's missing the context of what's going on. He doesn't have connection with you, and he is not being given choices. And that puts someone into dysregulation in any environment, especially in school, because you really don't have choice. Like you're literally trapped doing whatever you're supposed to be doing. And that's hard for a tiny body to figure out because they're just neurocepting that information constantly as being unsafe. And of course, that's not exactly what we're getting into, but it just amplified for me once again that this is so important for us at every level of what we do, not just in our business. So let's get into it. Context, choice, and connection. So Before we get into those three C's, it's really important to remember the three principles of polyvagal theory. And if you don't know these, then you can go back and look at even like some of the nervous system stuff I have in the free courses. But if you have any of the paid nervous system courses and body touch, anything like that, then I've presented this information in some way, and so you have access to it. I also have Notion guides about this. So I'll link the Notion guide in the one that I'm giving out today. So you can go back and look through that and kind of dive in a little bit more with like the actual physical aspects of the nervous system and how it works. But the three things that we need to remember are that the autonomic nervous system works in a hierarchy. So it will always take in information and go down this hierarchy in a specific way. So at the top, we have our ventral vagal system, which is our system of connection, safety, and engagement. It's also the rest and digest phase. This is where we want people to be when they come and see us. We want to put them into ventral vagal with everything that we do. Because when they're in ventral vagal, their bodies will heal faster. The body prioritizes these activities like digestion and wound care and all of these things that will not be prioritized in the other steps in the hierarchy. When people become dysregulated, so they're triggered by something or they're having a bad day or, anything happens, really could be you woke up on the wrong side of the bed. You go into sympathetic first. So from ventral vagal, we go down to sympathetic, which is our action phase. This is where we have fight or flight. The body is prioritizing getting away, and it feels a lot like anxiety or chaos or anger, things that that prompt kind of unhinged responses is the best way to describe them, where you're doing things you shouldn't be doing, you're not thinking clearly. But fight and flight are really the main phases of that. So just keep that in mind as we get into what we're going to talk about next. Last is dorsal vagal. So if your body cannot fight or flee, if it feels trapped, then it goes into a shutdown state. Or if it feels overwhelmed, it goes into a shutdown state. And this is so that it can preserve itself. It's like doing all these things, expelling all this energy, and nothing is getting better. So you're just shut down and try to protect yourself. And this can look like people pleasing, which is called the fawn response, where we just are like, we can't deal with this anymore. Think about the idea of like making too many choices about what to eat for dinner. How many of us just go, I don't care, pick something. I'll eat whatever you eat. That's a fawn response. It's a people-pleasing response to a certain extent because we just can't deal with it anymore. And that's like a healthy example of it, right? Like that's not the worst thing to do. And then some disconnection, like not even paying attention to what's going on or caring. So first principle of polyvagal theory, the autonomic nervous system works in that hierarchy. It is the same for every single person. So we can kind of guesstimate where people are, what's going on, and how to bring them back up into that safe space. The next principle is that our body has an internal surveillance system. This is called neuroception. So that neuroceptive quality of the nervous system allows the body to make a decision beyond our conscious awareness about whether we feel safe or unsafe. So there's no perception here necessarily. There's no reasoning aspect. It's just the body feels and the body responds. And what it's feeling is inside our bodies. So it's regulate or not regulating, but like paying attention to surveilling our heart rate, our breathing, our digestion, the pain in our muscles. It's taking in all that information. It's taking in information from outside our bodies, so our physical location, the environment around us, our neighborhood, our country, our global environment. It's perceiving information about that. And then it's taking in or surveilling information between bodies. So us together looking at each other on the camera right now, or when you're in another room with someone, in a group with a bunch of someone's, or with animals even. So our nervous system is constantly like sensing the electrical signals that are coming from these other individuals or taking in sensory information about what we see on their face, the expressions that they make, their body mechanics, the way that they move, their body language. We're constantly taking in that information, and it is, once again, deciding if we're safe or unsafe in an automatic sense. It doesn't have anything to do with our awareness of the situation. And the last principle that we're going to keep in mind is that humans are wired for co-regulation, or safe connection with others. And the only way for us to effectively co-regulate is to feel safe within ourselves. So our body has to neurocept safety within the inside, in our body and our brain. It has to feel safe with the other person or the group that you're trying to co-regulate with. And it has to feel safe coming into connection with that group. So it's one thing to feel safe in the environment, and it's another thing to feel safe with that other person and be able to actually connect with them on a deeper level than just like that sensory input. So through co-regulation, our nervous systems will neurocept safety or unsafety, and they will automatically go up and down that ladder of the hierarchy. Um, it likes to mimic things, and so one thing that tends to happen is if we come into the environment with someone who is not regulated on their own because of their own reasons, it will try to mimic where they're at, and so you may be put into, let's say, fight or flight or shutdown because you're being presented with someone who's in that state, and your body neurocepts that and it starts to mimic that. So this is an important thing to keep in mind as well, because we are, when we provide a service, the co-regulator. So it is our responsibility to provide that co-regulation with someone, which means that they need to feel safe with us and they need to feel safe connecting with us. It's also important to think about because it's why they pay us for our services. They want the co-regulation. They want the connection. And so we are there to provide this as a service, essentially, which means, once again, we have to be the right person for that. We have to be in the right state. So as we get into talking about these 3 C's, we're going to keep going back to those main concepts of like, we're the co-regulator, we have this hierarchy that we go through, and neuroception is very important. Okay, let's start with the first C, which is context. So context is all about gathering information to understand and respond to experiences, things that we're experiencing in the moment and things that we have experienced in the past. The nervous system is constantly monitoring, interpreting the environment, right, through neuroception, and that provides the context for our experience. So we can maybe be using the implicit pathways, the things that are implied, the things that are not said out loud, to give cues of safety, like when you come into a room and the environment is set up in a way that you like the big light is not on, right? That's a cue of safety. Or we do it through explicit communication. And a lot of times without explicitly stated information. So if we're not, having a conversation back and forth about things, or we're not presenting it explicitly, the nervous system then is forced to rely on past experiences. And it uses that neuroception most of the time to feel unsafe because it makes up stories. It also depends what state we're in when we receive the context, but a lot of times we're making up stories about the past because that's how the body keeps us safe. So it's not doing it because like we're overly anxious or we're not in the right mindset or we're, not thinking positively. It does it because it's trying to keep us safe. So it takes that past information of what we've received or what we've experienced, and it makes up a story. In a treatment setting, so context will play a crucial role in the client experience because they are physically assessing the environment, such as the temperature, the lighting, the sound, the scent. They come to you in a physical state, so they're already, experiencing something in their body, whether it's a skin condition that they're dealing with, that they're coming to see you for, muscle tension, some sort of pain, if you're doing massage. They have a lot of stress. So they come in, they book an appointment, and they come in this current physical state, and that affects our treatment. They have a previous treatment history and they have previous experiences. So they may have received services before that, put them in a state of dysregulation and they don't want that to happen again. They may have different levels of comfort or preferences and things that they want. And if you're only doing the same thing every time, you're not meeting that demand or, um, modifying for people, then that's going to play into their experience. And of course, they all have current health conditions and contraindications and things that come up. And so all of these are part of where we can provide context and adjust the context to make it a little bit better for their nervous system. That allows us to customize our treatment approaches. It allows us to create the more comfortable, effective service experience. It allows us to anticipate potential concerns and like be really proactive by thinking about what could possibly go wrong here. Where do all of these fit into each level of the service? And how can I provide explicit information, explicit context so that the person feels safe throughout every single stage of the service? So, for example, when clients are booking a service, they have to have certain types of context in order to feel safe to follow through with actually booking. Otherwise, they just won't book, right? They may email you with a fight, like, why is this expensive? Or why does this include this and not that? They may flee, so they don't ever book. They just go find someone else, or they shut down and they don't book at all. Every once in a while, you have a people pleaser, and they will just book anyways because they want to please you in some way. They created already a personal relationship with you, whether it's like you met them in person or, whatever. They're a people pleaser. They're going to book whatever. So every once in a while that comes up, but most of the time it's people just don't book, right? Because they're scared in some way. Their nervous system has not been given the context that it needs to feel safe with this process. So some of those things are going to be availability issues. So, we can't control availability all the time, but if you have the ability to provide more context here, saying things like, if you can't fit, if you don't find a place to fit into the schedule, contact me. Because maybe they need to come in the evening and you don't have any evening availabilities or, whatever. So provide that information as well as providing information about what to do when they do have a scheduling conflict. Like, what if they book a service and then they can't make it there, especially if you're having them pay in advance. So if you have, prepaid options or required deposits, what happens if they can't make it? That's pretty standard protocol for us as service providers to provide some sort of cancellation policy, but sometimes the policies are unclear. So that can be a concern with context, really, in that first stage. The other thing I find, and this is kind of like, uh, you know, people are providing context sometimes, but they're doing it in a way that's very mean. Uh, that's the only way to say it. It just comes off very mean. Like, I'm a service provider and my time is valuable, and if you can't make it, that's on you. Like, no, there's a better way to say that can be more gentle for the nervous system so that they don't immediately go into fight or flight. Like, that's a sign of dysregulation, I think, on our end, where we've been burned somehow and have to project that out into the environment. I see actually a lot of estheticians do this on their social media, and it always makes me really uncomfortable. Well, they're like, I can't believe I have to say my policies again, but here it is. This is my policy. And if you don't come, then you get charged. Okay, cool. Like, it happens, but you don't need to do that on social media. So anyways, I would say unclear policies as well as policies that are overly rigid and provide no context as to like what to do if something comes up that's an emergency. Another context concern at the booking stage is just having unclear service descriptions or unclear pricing, maybe like a bunch of add-ons or a bunch of different services. So being really clear about that can kind of fix that situation. Communication barriers or misunderstandings. So sometimes it's nice to just have other people go through and make sure that your policies make sense, that they're clear. I had this happen once. It wasn't at the booking stage, it was at the service stage because she did not clearly read the email. And when she came in, she was frustrated because she didn't read the email the way that it was intended. And I felt bad about that because I could have been more clear. So that was, a context issue where I did not provide clear communication, and that made her really frustrated. And all I had to do was go back and change the email so now it doesn't happen again to the next person. So paying attention to those things and being really flexible when they come up. Payment method concerns are a booking context issue. So providing context about how people pay. Do they need to pay with a credit card, with cash? What are the policies around payment? Um, the next one is something that you cannot do anything about, and that's existing money trauma. So if a client has existing money trauma and they bring that into their booking experience, there's absolutely nothing that you can do about that. They can come at you about prices or harass you about things all they want, but you can't fix that, right? And so I put this down here just because I think it's something for us to keep in the back of our mind, that people will come in with their money trauma and project that onto us, and we need to step away from that when it happens, instead of reacting with dysregulation and going into fight or flight and then getting into like an argument with someone potentially. Not that we do that, but like, or we get really offended, right? I'm like, "Oh, I can't believe they won't pay for my services." It's like, they have money trauma, obviously. There's nothing we can do about that. Confusion about location is one thing that can happen in booking. I will say that from personal experience, um, I have a lot of confusion about people's locations on social media. So I see someone who is following me or something, or takes one of my classes, and I'm looking at their social media, no information about where they're located. That's a primary way that clients find us. So if they don't know where you're at, because you don't even have your address on social media, or you don't have a link that even says your address, then how will they ever find you? It doesn't make sense to me. So um, I don't think that we're like purposely confusing about location, but I think that we don't look at every single thing that a client might use to find us and think about like, oh, is this actually easy to find? Am I actually giving them the information? We just assume like they can Google it or they'll get it in their booking information or whatever. But how are they even going to book if they don't know where you're at? So it's a very weird thing that comes up, but try to be as clear as possible about that, obviously. And then, the other booking context concern is that lots of people have anxiety about meeting someone new, going somewhere new, and doing something new. So anytime that they're having to make a change from their regular places that they go or somewhere that they've been before, it's hard. And so one thing that I think really helps with this is like being very clear about who you are, having pictures available so that they can see you and they put your face to the name, and they know who you are when they walk in the building. Like, our spa has multiple different providers, and so when we have a new client and they walk in, it's nice for them to like put our face to what they booked and not walk in and be like, oh, I don't know who I'm seeing today, right? They know who we are based on what we look like, because hopefully we have pictures there somewhere. My anxiety about going somewhere new is always parking. Where do I park? Like, I'll like look up, do they have a parking lot? What's the closest parking lot? If I have to pay for parking, can I prepay so I know where I'm going? I don't want to drive around, find parking spots. So try to be very clear about even that kind of stuff. Now, when they get into the actual service, then the context changes. So the concerns that we're going to have around context include anxiety about new treatments or new procedures that they've never had before, feeling rushed or pressured. So this also can come up if they're running late. And it's really unfortunate that we don't all get to do this, but being able to provide a buffer time so that you can accommodate things like, in a city like Austin, there's so much traffic and you never know what's going to happen, that it's a good idea to have a good buffer there, just so you can say like, don't worry if you're running late, we can always make it work. Or even let them know like what the policy is. I don't like to make them feel rushed getting on the table. So like sitting down and having a little conversation beforehand so that they can breathe and relax, is also a good idea. Different concerns would be also previous trauma responses being triggered by something. So you don't always have control over that, but there are some very, specific ways that we can neurocept safety to the body. Um, and those come with like being clear about draping, for example, and how they will be draped during a service. Um, and then being very diligent about your draping and making sure that like you're not just like flinging sheets up when you're taking people's arms out to do an arm massage, right? Like just being very clear about those types of things. Um, Pain or discomfort would trigger a trauma response as well. Um, just being uncomfortable with physical touch can be a trauma trigger. So like I said, there's not a whole lot you can do about that, but just knowing that about people asking really good questions allows you to modify maybe your explanation of what's going to happen, giving them a full overview of like, okay, this is what this is gonna look like and this is why it's going to look like that. And everything will be covered that needs to be covered. That's something I provide like in consent forms. So people book a massage, for example, the consent outlines, this is required by the state of Texas, but it still outlines like exactly what will be draped and what is not okay. So being really clear about that. It could also come from environmental sensitivities. So scent is a big one. Sound is another one. I did not realize until I started being really clear with people about sound, like asking them what they wanted, that so many people hate bird noises. There's like a lot of people that get triggered by bird noises. And I had no idea, but it happens. And you know what? I can't control it in my room because there's like a bird nest outside my room somewhere, I think. I hear birds all the time, and it's not from my music, it's from real live birds. Um, but I find that interesting because I've gone other places where they specifically play bird sounds because it helps us to regulate our nervous systems. So just goes to show that like not everything works for everybody, right? It's good to ask those questions and then provide the context if you need. Like when people now come in and say they don't like bird noises, I tell them, hey, there's like real birds that live outside and I can't control them. They will still chirp, and I'm sorry, but they're they're cute. I like them. Makes me feel like I'm outside. Uh, So the other things I have on here relate to communication. So they're like uncertain maybe about communication during the treatment. They don't know if they should tell you if something hurts or whatever. They don't know that they can do that or that they should do that. So just letting them know, like, if you're uncomfortable in any way, tell me and I will fix it. You don't have to be uncomfortable when you lay on the table. If you don't like your face being face down in a face cradle, then let's do side lying. Or if you don't like your arms left out of the sheets, let's put them underneath. Just being really clear about things. If you can't lay on your back for too long, then we can raise your knees and it feels better on your lower back. There's just little things that you have to really communicate with people so that they feel comfortable expressing their needs and preferences. And that's the other aspect of this is it's difficult for some people to do that because they're people pleasers and they don't want to like make you uncomfortable. I've had people tell me like, "Oh, sorry, but I move a lot because I have this thing wrong with me." I'm like, "Why are you saying sorry to me? Can I make you more comfortable? Like, what do we do for this?" You don't want people to feel like that. Um, or like, maybe they've told somebody in the past and that person has responded negatively. And so that context cue for them is that if I say something, then she'll get mad at me. So just, being really clear at the beginning that I want you to be as comfortable as possible. So please tell me anything, pressure, anything at all, you know? Um, and another thing that I do is like I don't do extractions unless people request them because to me, I ask people in every consultation form for a facial, what do you like least about facials? And 99% of the time it's extractions. Every once in a while it's something different. Like I've had people say they don't like their scalp touched, they don't like their ears touched. Um, what's another one that's come up that I thought was really weird? Worst part of the facial. Oh, when they rub their hands on the towel, which I do because I have a towel that covers and I use that to wipe my hands. And I've had people say they hate that. So it's like random things will come up that you would never even have thought about probably unless you ask that question. Then you can provide them the context about those sorts of things, right? Okay, so that's the service, and then I'm going to get into checkout. So checkout context concerns are going to be payment processing issues, um, more like, maybe their card gets declined or something. I've had this happen very rarely where someone's card gets declined, but then they're like freaking out because, chances are it's something like they didn't transfer money into that account or they gave you the wrong card. It's always silly things. So being upfront about like it's okay, we'll try something else and not reacting negatively is probably the best way to deal with that. Um, the other context concern around money is uncertainty about tipping etiquette. So they don't know how much to tip, what's a good amount. I've noticed in transitioning to like not promoting tips, I still accept tips, and this is like the reason I have tips turned on is because I provide discounted services. And so when I provide discounted services, I do like for people to have the option to tip. But when they pay full price, I don't think they should tip. My prices are meant to be all inclusive. But a lot of times I have people who are most of the time other service providers that get freaked out by that. They're like, no, I can't not tip because it like feels wrong to you to not tip for some reason. I I don't know why. I mean, I have thoughts on this. It's a whole other lesson, but uncertainty about tipping and that etiquette is a concern. So if you have anything that you can provide them about your policies, give that information to them before they get to that point. I even have it now as part of my booking process where when you book an appointment, you have to check off the pricing and tipping policy that says, if you try to pay in advance for your service, then the system automatically adds a tip. And I hate that it does this because I don't want them to pay a tip. But I have to put that down there so that they know that it's okay for them to go back and turn that off and say no tip. And I provide that information during booking. That way they do it and don't let the system add extra on. So, anyways, the other things we can do better about context is giving them really good information about aftercare. So a lot of times people are uncertain about what they should do afterwards. Should they book another service and when should they do it? Should they be using a certain product? Should they not use a certain product? They may have concerns about what's going to happen after the service. Give them all the context for that. And this can be really difficult because you don't always have time after the service to give them this big long overview of everything they should be doing. The best way to make this easy is to have some sort of system in place where you have like follow-up cards or something that outline what people should be doing and you just give it to them every single time. Um, there's plenty of companies that offer like templates for this, but Dermalogica was a great one. They had like every product that they made listed. And so you would just go down the list and like check what you were recommending for them. And then there was like a place to circle, like if you should use it every day, every other day, morning or night, and just outline all of that information. The other things you could provide them are like, okay, after your service, you should rest. You should drink water. You should not go out and do anything crazy. That's usually what I tell people after like a lymphatic drainage. Don't do anything crazy today. Like literally just go rest. Your body's going to detox and you might feel like crap. And that's just something that you have to know before you go home and feel that way. Because if you go home and feel that way, then you're going to be mad that you feel that way and you're going to wonder why. You're going to think I made you sick. Those things can happen. Think about facials, like with chemical peels, for example. People have some pretty negative reactions sometimes. And Sometimes it's a normal part of the healing process. They just need to know that could happen and be prepared for that. That way they don't freak out when it does. But then also letting them know, like, if something happens, please contact me so that I can help you. Letting them know that it's safe to do that. They may have concerns about scheduling future appointments and knowing how to do that. Sometimes, we rebook them immediately. Sometimes we let them do it on their own, depending on your system. Just be really clear about your policies with that. The other thing that can give people anxiety at the end of a service is asking for reviews immediately, or like putting them on the spot for something like that. So give them the option to leave reviews, because obviously we want feedback and we want reviews, but don't make it feel like they have to do it right away, because that can be really uncomfortable. And then let them know what to do if they're not satisfied. Because if they experience any sort of dissatisfaction and they have anxiety about that, then, they're not going to come back. And sometimes that's okay with us, and sometimes we want to save that client from never coming back. So use that to your discretion, I guess. Okay, so that's the context. And the idea is that we're giving them the explicit instruction in all of these places so that their nervous system can feel safe in booking a service, receiving a service, and checking out after the service. And the action steps that I have for you are to look at every step of your process. So look at the booking, look at your social media, look at your website. What does someone have to do to book an appointment? And then from that process to the checkout, what do they do afterwards? And just go through every single step and take this list, maybe use it as a guideline, but where can you provide more explicit information? And maybe where can you simplify information to limit confusion? Because sometimes we want to give too much, and then that makes things really complicated. What can we do to help the nervous system neurocept safety in every single step? And kind of map that out for yourself, almost like I can't remember what they call it. When you're like a needs analysis, like look at every single thing and say like, what do I need to change? What's looking good? That's the starting point, right, for context. Now, the context informs choice. So based on the contextual information, what the nervous system has received, either through implicit, pathways of context where it's just neurocepting, or explicit pathways where we are giving them the information they need, then it's going to respond to that stimuli, weigh the risk, weigh the reward, and it's going to initiate the appropriate response. Choice also relates to the nervous system making a choice about what state it's going to be in. So the nervous system makes a choice about where it's going to go, but it also needs the ability to make choices in order to feel safe, if that makes sense. So when choice is not available, or when there's too many choices, then we become dysregulated. Oftentimes, when choice is limited, the nervous system feels trapped and it begins to look for a way out through fight or flight. And when there's too many choices, the nervous system becomes overwhelmed. It starts to shut down. So both of these, not enough choice, too many choices, result in dysregulation. And it's kind of our job to constantly be reassessing and doing these analysis and asking questions to find the happy medium for us and how much choice we provide and how much choice we're kind of limiting, right? So it's not too complicated. Remember that the manifestation of choice comes from context, right? So we have to provide the context, we have to give the information, we have to set the stage so that they feel really comfortable when they come in. And we have to kind of think about that perceived safety. Are we giving them the perception of safety from ourselves from each step. So in this stage, we're really looking at how do we provide choice at every level of service? And how do we provide like reasonable choice, right? So for example, we want to give them choices of services to book, but we don't want to give them so many choices that they can't figure out which service they should book. One way to incorporate choice with limited services is with changing your appointment times. So meaning that like you provide 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours, or whatever. And thinking about this kind of a different way, I always prefer long services. I prefer for my clients to receive long services. So for a long time, I did not offer a 60-minute facial. Recently, I added one to my menu, and the reason is that sometimes people come in and they cannot lay down for 90 minutes. I mean, I know this is a thing. I knew this was a thing, but I was just like, look, they need it. They need the 90 minutes. If they come in that anxious that they can't lay down, they need the 90 minutes. But that really limits their choice in the matter, right? And so it can take away from them feeling safe because they don't have the choice to say, hey, my body cannot deal with this. My body needs only 60 minutes because I can't lay down for that long without feeling anxious, right? So giving them that choice allows them to manage their time. It also like sometimes people just don't have time for that in this busy day and age where we're all overly productive. They need that option for shorter services just to fit in their schedule. So I offered that. For me, it kind of felt like, oh, I'm doing a people-pleasing thing like for other people, but it really wasn't about that when I thought about it. It was about providing manageable appointment times for different nervous systems and their ability to control the amount of time that they were on the table. Another place where you can provide choice is, having different service options, obviously, but different add-ons or add-ins. I'm not a big fan of add-ons that like cost extra money unless it's going to be extra time, but just giving them the option to change up what you're doing or add things in without making it too complicated. Like, oh, there's a gua sha facial and there's a lymphatic facial. Just it's all a facial, right? So just give them the option to choose when they check out if they want to do lymphatic or they want to do gua sha. Just make it all one time. Um, and then, simplify it even more to not charge different prices for different services that are all the same time. I think that makes things really complicated too. Like you have two 60-minute facials and one's $190 and one's $200, but why? And usually it's because you have a product difference in terms of price, but that needs to be something dealt with on the back end and not put on the consumer. And what will end up happening is they will make the choice for the cheaper service because money trauma usually, but they just don't know. Why would they pick the more expensive service? You also want to give them the choice to decide how much information to share with you. A lot of times we have consultation forms digitally that will set to require information. And I would say set it to choice unless it's something you really, really need to know, or provide the context as to why you want that information. Even personal information, some people are weird about sharing their address or any of that, and we may ask that information and they need to know why. That way you provide the context for not allowing a choice, if that makes sense. And then let them opt into preferred communication methods if you have the option to do that. I know, some booking systems don't allow you to do this, but it's annoying to receive emails if you don't want emails and to receive texts if you don't want texts. So giving them the option if you have the ability to do so makes it feel a little bit less like you're being forced into something. During the service, provide them choice by allowing them to set boundaries around touch and pressure. So usually this is by letting them know beforehand, you have a choice. What type of pressure do you like? Or, during this part of the service, we tend to use more pressure rather than less. Or during this part, we use less pressure because it's more effective if we use less pressure. Speaking about lymphatic drainage specifically, a lot of times people think it's going to be a regular massage and it's not. So just giving them that context, right? And then letting them know if it's uncomfortable, let me know and we can modify. Or let's say you start in on the service and you just ask them, how's the pressure? Does that feel okay? Giving them the option to have a choice in that. Uh, Giving them options for communicating preferences about their environment. So letting them choose music or musical themes, letting them choose if you turn the table warmer on or not, and letting them know I can turn it off if you get hot, I can turn it on if you get cold or if you're cold. Choosing scent, asking them, is there anything you don't like? This is big for me. I asked this question in my consultation specifically because I have scents that I really don't like that are like triggers. Lemongrass, hate it. Never want lemongrass touching me or around me in my environment. And so that's something that in the past when I would receive services would be a really big issue for me is how things smelled. So being able to have that preference outlined or have choice in that, I think would have made a lot of facial experiences that I've had a lot better. Now I know better and I just choose people who use things that I like, but not everybody's at that level of receiving, right? Where they can do that. Allow them to decide the level of engagement and conversation. So if you know that you're a talker, give them the option for a silent service. And if you know that you're always silent, give them the option to talk if they need to. I am always silent. I prefer a silent service. I don't really talk to people usually unless they talk to me. So it may be nice to let them know when I begin, hey, I usually stay pretty quiet, but if you have any questions, if you need to talk about anything, go for it. We can chat. And then also give them the option to choose to pause their treatment if they're uncomfortable. If they need to go to the bathroom. Oh my gosh, this comes up all the time. I tell them to go before, but then halfway through they have to pee. It's cool. You can get up. I promise. It doesn't ruin anything that we're doing. It'll take 5 minutes max for you to put your clothes back on or put a robe on, go pee and come back. Not a big deal. Or if they don't feel good or whatever, you can always stop. So just let them know that they're in control. During checkout, give them options for future appointment scheduling. I really shut down when someone says, oh, 4 weeks from now is this date and this time. I'm like, no, no, no. I don't want to do this. But also, my fond response comes up and I'm like, okay, even though I know I probably can't or won't do it, and then I just cancel it or reschedule it later. I don't want to do that to people. So just give them the options, saying, hey, what day works for you? What time works for you? That's a better way, I think, to go into it than just telling them exactly what time. Unless, of course, you're really limited, then that's your only option. And then you provide the context. I'm booked. This is what I have. Give them options about home care products. And this is always really hard because you want to do it without feeling forceful and obnoxious. I think the easiest way is to set things out or write it down for them and let them decide and just give them the context hey, this is what I think you need, but also if you don't want it, it's fine. You're cool. No pressure. These are the options. Choosing whether to provide feedback, of course. I do this just by they get an email the next day that says hey, if you enjoyed your service, leave a Google review. They should be allowed that choice. I don't know many places now where you go in and they give you a feedback card and make you fill it out immediately, but that never works for me. Personally, I need time to process before I respond. So I would never feel comfortable leaving feedback right away. And make sure they are comfortable, give them choice about suggested treatment plans. So, let's say you think somebody needs a series of chemical peels or a series of facial massage. What kind of choice can you provide them so that they don't feel like they have to do just this one thing? for example, like sometimes people ask me how often should I get this facial massage service? And it's like, that's really up to you and your comfort level. Do you want, I would say do it every week. But if you don't want to pay to do it every week, do it every 2 weeks or every month. Whatever works for you. It's not really a strict thing. And maybe that can be too much choice for people, but make sure that they're comfortable with something. Don't force them into coming every week because you think they need it when it's dysregulating them somehow. Once again, getting into like, are they fawning when they're just like, okay, yeah, or do they actually really want that thing? Giving them the choice is the only way to know. Okay, so action for choice is to look at every single step of your service process again, as you're doing this already for context, and look at what choices can you provide to enhance the experience. Or maybe where are you providing too many choices? Are you providing the explicit information that people need through context to inform a choice so that they're making the right choice for them? And I also want to remind you guys, I feel like this is really prominently discussed in massage. Part of it is because we have legal requirements about getting consent, but not as much with aesthetics. And in aesthetics, a lot of times we gain consent for legal purposes. So we position it as, you're giving away your right to sue us if something bad happens, is the positioning of the consent. And I think that we need to be a little bit more intentional about how we gain consent and what we gain consent for. So that way, we're not doing something that people are uncomfortable with. So for example, intraoral massage. I think that we need to gain consent for intraoral massage from everybody that we work on because we're sticking our fingers in their mouth. So it may be known to you that you want to do this service and why you want to do it, but the client may not know and may not feel comfortable with it. I think it's really important to outline that and make sure they know they have a choice for these types of things. Deep tissue is another example. If you're a massage therapist, like you need to gain consent before you go and do deep work. So I think just more explicitly gaining consent from people in a way that is not always positioned as something legal that you're doing because you have to, but in a way that is intentional because you want people to feel comfortable. And that's kind of how I've changed up my, Texas required legal consent I have to gain for a massage is like changing the verbiage a little bit so that people know that it's for their comfort, for their protection, as well as for my protection, because part of that consent is letting them know that they can't like do anything to me. And that we all have the right to stop the service at any time if we feel uncomfortable in any way. Like just being really explicit about that, but also intentional in your verbiage so that it's comforting and not setting the tone for like, oh, they just don't want me to sue them if something goes bad, so I can't even talk to them if something goes bad, And then thinking about for you, are there places where you can be more flexible with providing choice? Because sometimes I feel like we're just set in our ways. My example of changing to offering a 60-minute treatment is probably a good one where I didn't want to be flexible because that's the way I do things. But it is beneficial. And of course, it's not my most booked service, but every once in a while I have someone book it. And it really is because like they've never had a facial before and don't know what to expect. They've never had a massage before. And so laying down for like 2 hours, they don't even know why they would want to do that. It's good for them to have that option to do just the short treatment. So where can you be flexible? And do you give your clients the opportunity to set boundaries? Like set good boundaries about the way that they're touched, how they are in the physical environment, the control they have over that. Do they have the ability to set boundaries? How much they share with you? Okay, last element is connection. So we experience through context, then we make choices, that allows us to kind of regulate how safe we feel. But through connection, it's really where we like become safely embodied. So we're in our body living our experience and feeling really safe because we had the context and made the choice to do so. And a lot of times we become dysregulated because safety is disrupted through lack of connection to some of these things. So, also, what tends to happen when we're dysregulated and when our safety is disrupted, we unknowingly reach out to others to find our way back to connection. So whether it's like seeking out someone in your family or seeking out a hug or like seeking out a friend to talk to, that's our way of bringing ourselves back into connection. And it's not uncommon for people to seek connection through our services. So they're booking because they're unknowingly trying to find their way back to connection, or they're intentionally setting the tone for like being regulated. But it's also how we market and like offer our services is like we're connecting with you, we're touching you, we're offering safe touch, which is a great way to co-regulate with people. So I think that at the base level, right, a touch-based service is connection through touch, but it is connection on multiple different levels if you build it into your service intentionally. And these four main ways that we connect are going to be connection to the self, so connecting with our own selves, connecting to the other people, so that's like the service aspect of we're connecting with someone else, connecting to nature, and connecting to spirit. Spirit just meaning like the whole entire universe and everything that's out there, whether you have something that you believe in religiously or spiritually or whatever, it's connection to otherness that allows us to like feel harmonious in our entire life, right? So when we're connected to all of these, then we are embodied and feel really harmonious and can feel safe. But when we lack connection, we become dysregulated. So I think the intentional aspect of this is like, yes, we're connecting with another person, so we need to regulate ourselves and do all the things we talked about. But can we also offer them ways to connect to these other three things, the self, nature, and spirit, through our service? So examples of this would be like connection to self, guiding clients through a mindful exercise of breathing or meditation, encouraging them to be aware of their body, checking in with them about how they feel in their body, their comfort levels, allow them silence to go inside into their brain, and really guiding them through that process sometimes because they're not used to it. A lot of people are disconnected from themselves, and that's like their primary disconnection point for dysregulation is they've shut off access to their own internal sensory system. And we do this naturally because I think part of it is we live in a very overly productive society that doesn't allow us time for rest and doesn't allow us to experience illness or experience pain, and it doesn't allow time for recovery. So a lot of times we work through pain, we work through discomfort by shutting off our access to ourself so that we can just get through the day, get through the month, the year, and it just continues and continues, right? So I love using a service as a way to guide people back into their body and their bodily lived experience because it allows them to reconnect to that. So the silence, the guided breathing, like telling them intentionally, let your mind wander. If you find yourself focusing on one thing, bring yourself back into the room and then let it wander again. Like just guide them through that process. Encourage them to sense what's going on in their body. Like when I do energy work, sometimes I like to tell them, like, you don't have to do anything, just focus on what you can feel. What do you feel in your body? Does it feel buzzy? Does it feel like things or strings are being pulled, or like, how do you feel? And then giving them the opportunity to share that. Like, how did you feel in your body? What did you sense? And if it's nothing, then it's nothing, and that's also okay. The other way that we can teach people to connect with themselves is teaching them how to massage themselves, how to care for themselves, and encouraging them to spend that time engaging in self-care with really simple massage techniques, simple connection techniques like just rest with your hands here and see what your skin feels like. Like get them to check in with themselves a little bit more and build that sensory knowledge of what does it feel like to be in a human body. Sometimes I tell people that too, like just put your hands here and breathe and remind yourself you're a human living a human experience in a human body. And just sense your hands touching your face. that's the best way to start, I think, any sort of service, whether it's us touching them or them touching themselves, is to just have that gentle resting touch. We talked a lot about connection to others, right? But we're going to practice active listening, maintain our boundaries, try to be present for people, use that clear communication, and create opportunities for them to have choice, and then regulate ourselves. So that's like a whole other aspect to this is like, where's your nervous system at? What kind of regulation and grounding do you need to do for you? With nature, we can incorporate natural elements in the treatment room, whether that's like plants or crystals or pieces of wood or like anything. As soon as I was writing this out, I was thinking of like this, like sun up, how our entry looks like we have kind of like wood shelves and plants, streaming out all over the place. And then like you go in their room and it's like light everywhere and beautiful. And then you go in my room and it's like the dark aspect and there's some crystals in there and different things that kind of bring you into that natural element along with the birds, the outside birds. We have those nature sounds. And you can always play nature sounds if it's appropriate, like using ocean-based tools like ocean drums or chimes that have different elemental aspects to it. Like all of this helps with our connection to nature. And if you have the ability, positioning your treatment table to allow, a view of outdoor spaces. I have like a galaxy thing above my table that actually like plays like little galaxy stuff if I turn it on to that. So like that's also a connection to nature in a certain aspect. Um, and then plant-based products. I mean, you don't have to do it, but it is a great way to connect to plants, plant spirits, nature, and natural medicine, especially if you're working with a brand where you really understand the origin of the plant, and the product and the intentionality of it. A lot of times we may choose to use like locally sourced products or I always come back to Laurel as an example, and I'm like, I don't know, what's that called when you repeat the same thing over and over again? Beating a dead horse or something. That's me with Laurel. But that is a perfect example of like intentionality and sourcing where you could go and find out exactly how they source their products, where they come from, the care that's put into the plant, and it transitions into this beautiful product that has like an energy to it. And that can really bring people into nature. And then connection to spirit. So creating this like sacred, calm atmosphere, being really mindful about everything, honoring their belief systems as well. Because, some of us have, me, for example, I have a very like witchy outlook on things and sometimes that can turn people off if they're more religious. So I really try to like gauge people where they're at and not be too specific with things unless they're like really into it and then I'll go crazy with them. But I just try to honor where they're at with their practices and keep my language very neutral in that aspect. Allow them space for meditation and quiet reflection, or like guiding them into the space of meditation and quiet reflection, and incorporating different techniques like energy work or whatever, grounding techniques, um, chakra work, anything like that that helps them to connect to the spiritual aspect. I love pulling cards for this, like tarot cards or oracle cards. Um, Creating like intentional rituals around spirit, allowing them to know like what I'm using planet wise. So we're using like planetary tuning fork, and this is why we're doing it for this specific energy. And it just gives you more of a connection to those things that are outside of our physical body. So like, yes, we have this physical body that we live in, that's very important, but also there's like all this stuff outside of us that is really important to connect to feel like you're part of something, if you will. Like not just part of your group, but part of like a big, big picture. So for the action step here, I think just going back into um, how you're marketing your services or offering them, and are you explaining the connection that is going to take place at all these levels? Can you enhance each stage of connection? Um, And then you're an important part of the picture. So what are you doing to make sure that you're a safe co-regulator? How are you coming into the space every day, after every client, before every client? Are you showing up, letting go of some things that you're holding on to, or are you showing up with trauma triggers that are like this all day long because of your clients? Uh, that can be really important, like an important first step even to look at here is like, where are you at? And it doesn't mean that you have to be perfect every day because our nervous systems are specifically trying to protect us and it does this when we need it. So obviously you have need of your nervous system maybe going into fight or flight, but having ways to bring yourself back down when that happens so that you can be there for your clients is really important. And also just having the awareness of like, oh, I'm in fight or flight right now. I need to chill out. I need to, you know, do my little ritual of lighting my incense and like clearing my room and playing my sound bowl for myself before my client comes in today. Or maybe, sometimes it's I need to get here earlier because I need more time. That's why I'm in fight or flight right now because I was late and I had to set up my room in 10 minutes or something like that. Okay, so those are your action steps. I have this all written out in the Notion guide. I'll send it to you, but I just want to finish by reminding you guys that this is a cycle. So like our context informs our choice impacts our connection creates new context, and then the cycle begins again. So the best that we can do is be intentional at every stage and try to provide the best level of care, but you can't be perfect, and that's okay. So giving yourself the grace when that happens, when you're dysregulating somebody and you can see that that's happening, and just trying to be flexible and take steps to improve, um, and change as you go is the best thing that you can do, especially if like your goal is to be a trauma informed provider. Well, you have to have the knowledge that like trauma impacts you too, so you're not ever going to be perfect, and the best that you can do is just try to provide that level of care that allows people to feel safe. Try to be the safest person for them in that moment that you can possibly be, and not be too hard on yourself when it doesn't work out the way you want it to. I think that's all I had. It was long, but I had so much that I wanted to say, and I think that it was all important.